we're going to be talking about the new Ford Mark IV GT, which is a $1.7 million track-only special. And it's come with a bit of controversy.
To those of you who don't understand why the Mark IV is a big deal in the Ford GT, GT40 sphere, it is because we all know the Ford versus Ferrari story, right? We all know that Ford wanted to beat Ferrari because Ferrari basically said no on a deal and yada, yada, yada. And what we saw in the movie was Ford beating Ferrari, which actually happened in 1966, and so on and so forth. But what we didn't kind of get, and the subtext that they wanted you to believe, but that actually wasn't true, was that it was an all-American, all-Ford effort. And it wasn't. The original car was a Lola GT with a Ford engine and bodywork that was actually inspired by the original Mustang concept, if you squint and stretch it a little bit. But at any rate, it wasn't so. Ford's like, okay. And then they got back to work. They completely redesigned the GT into the Mark IV, which is what you see here. And the Mark IV won with, I believe, AJ Foyt and, gosh, I'm going to forget. I think Dan Gurney. I think that's why you see the little hump on the driver's thing. That's the Gurney bump or whatever, because he was the tallest driver. And then the Mark IV was the all-American victory at Le Mans that beat Ferrari by like something ridiculous, like 40 miles. Or something like that.
Which in racing terms is an eternity.
Even on the monster that is the Le Mans racetrack, that is a huge march. That's like 8 laps, roughly. So to honor that all-American victory, Ford is bringing you the Mark IV Ford GT, which looks stunning, and on the rear wing says Multimatic, which is Canadian.
I was just going to say, that all-American victory, which is made not in America. It's literally made in Canada.
Yes.
But that's fine. The controversy of this car, which is something that people have talked about, is this car. Now, the new Ford GT that this is sort of based on, we all know has a 3.5 liter twin turbo EcoBoost, putting out roughly 600 horsepower, right? And that is not a number to slouch at, because many people have driven the Ford GT. Many people have been in ride-alongs. I've been one of those people. And it is an absolute mind F as to how fast that car is. This car has 800 horsepower from the same engine. And everyone's kind of saying, what the hell, Ford? Why is the regular Ford GT not been given that engine the whole time?
There's two things to why this is very dumb things I've ever heard vehicle like, why didn't you give us all the power in the first place? Yuck. Have you never, ever seen a car come out? What comes out first? The regular one. What comes out that? A slightly spicier version of the regular one. What comes out after that? The really spicy version of the car. And so on and so forth. That's why things like AMG exists. That's why the M Division exists. That's why Ford Racing exists. That's why Ford Performance exists. It's literally how they do things. It just doesn't change when the car becomes a mid-engine supercar. Number two, it never needed that horsepower because these cars get choked to high hell when they go racing, and in the GTLM class, they get neutered so much. I mean, one of the dark secrets about GT racing is the production cars and oftentimes make way more horsepower than their road-going variants, which is why I'm kind of interested to see if the GT2 class kind of grabs hold, because those are 700 horsepower with less aero and driver aids. It's a topic for another day. Why go through all the effort? You have an engine that's lightweight, strong, makes the power you have, has a wide power band, which is what you need for racing. Well, okay, let's see what it'll do in street trim. Okay, it made 600 and change, and that's enough. And the car was a rocket ship. The last thing I'll touch on with this is that we knew this engine could make this power. We knew this all the way back when the engine was brand spanking new. Why did we know this? Because the Huna truck made 900 horsepower with a 3.5 liter EcoBoost V6. We knew it was possible. It's just these cars were so expensive. They were, $500,000 brand spanking new, that nobody really, really wanted to play with them, so to speak, right? They didn't want to be mess with its originality, because these things are collector cars. They will be million-dollar cars in 20 years without a question or a shadow of a doubt, so they didn't want to ruin it, especially given the low production numbers. This is the swan song. You don't want the least powerful version of the car being the swan song. You want the thing everybody wants and remembers as the last thing, so it sticks in your head, so that if they decide to pull a Viper with this and in 7 years they're like, man, we should build another one, people remember this one. They don't necessarily remember the original. They remember this one, and they're like, well, if we get that spicy meatball in the car, tell me more, I'm interested, here's my money. That sort of a thing.
It's such a hilarious argument to me. It's just like, why didn't we get this 800 horsepower version? It's like, again, because it doesn't need it. Cars don't need 1,000 horsepower. None of them do. Literally none of them do. Is that awesome? Yeah, super awesome. But like,
I'll be knocking on that door. What are you trying to say?
Right, exactly. But the thing is, like, especially to be fun, cars don't need to the moon horsepower. They just don't. It's such a stereotype to be like, oh, well, the Miata. But like, yeah, but like the Miata is a fun car to drive. Like, you get that car on a back road doing 30 to 40 miles an hour, it's going to be way more fun than a supercar doing 30 to 40 miles an hour, because you cannot exploit what a supercar does on a back road. And if you do, you're going to run out of talent real fast, not only crash, but also then endanger the lives of others, which is not really a great thing. I would take a Miata on a windy back road than a supercar for that particular reason. Is more power fun? Yeah, it's super fun. And you know what? You can exploit it at the drag strip or on track or whatever. But if you have this kind of money, buy this, don't buy the regular Ford GT. That's the whole end of the argument. You don't need the insanity of everything. You can buy a regular Ford GT and you can have fun on a track too. If you have the money, you can buy this as if you don't feel the regular Ford GT is up to the trackability. It's just a funny argument. It's such a D-swinging contest in a lot of ways, and it seems to be such a contrived argument at this point. We've gotten pretty much.
Thank you, Doug.
We mentioned it. Yes, thank you for the other 100 again as well. Awesome. Just to put a bow on my thing is like, the horsepower wars, are sort of over. We now have daily driver cars, EVs and ICEs, that are reaching 1,000 horsepower. We have these, super insane cars that are 800, 900, 1,500, 2,000 horsepower. I think we need to stop, honestly. Like, we don't need more. What we should be doing is sort of making the car itself overall a better handling, better balanced, and better overall thing. And that's sort of what everything is going towards,
Sorry,
obviously.
Do you not see the arrow on this thing? Once we loop back around to it, but like the arrow is straight race car stuff.
But just in general, like, I think there was a comment, I got to look back at the comments about 1,000 horsepower Miata. Like, that would be a riot for like 3 days, and then it would get super boring and super tiring.
Yeah.
Just go get a Mustang and boost it. Like, you don't need 1,000 horsepower Miata. Get a Mustang, do mad burnouts.
Then the Miata will finally be interesting.
That way. I'm all for power, but like, to me, 400 to 500 horsepower in almost any platform is pretty much the sweet spot.
There's a couple things I wanted to touch on. Number one, if Ford launched this GT, and we all gasped when we saw the original price tag of the reintroduction of the EcoBoost GT, it was like $500,000, and it was like, are people actually going to pay that for something with a Ford badge on it? And they did. If they gave you more power, that number would have been higher. So why not take the money you make by selling the other ones and build something like this, as opposed to building something like this, which only 67 people are going to get and is only legal on the track. So this is a toy. And then to your point about power, yes, anyone will tell you that if you have a back road, you want to kind of feel, why do we drive in a spirited fashion in the first place? It's because we want to kind of let out our inner race car driver. We're not, but we want to let it out. And if we had a car with a shit ton of power, you lose some of the fun, because to get the most out of that car, you are doing a lot of miles per hour. In a slower car, you make one little mistake and you might be able to catch it. Unless you have extensive driver training, if you make a little mistake in a big power car, it's a big mistake. And I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer, because again, look at me, right? I am making something that the goal is 700 horsepower at the wheels. And that is going to be a rocket ship. And one of the things that I've already thought about with this whole build was I'm going to lose some of that back road fun ability with that car, which is why I already have that already percolating in my brain. To put a kind of final thing on this topic is, if you're the person who sits here and says, why didn't we get the big power first? Clearly has never, ever, ever, ever driven any type of car that is even remotely like this. They've never driven a supercar. They've never driven anything with a carbon fiber monocoque that is light, stiff, rigid, and can handle like something like this can around a track or in a fashion that is safe. You've never driven anything like that, because I guarantee you, if you went out and drove on a track, got proper instruction, and was actually able to put decent laps together, you would never ever complain that these things don't have enough power. There's a reason why most guys who start in sports car racing start with, and just to bring it full circle, the Miata Cup or the GR86 Cup or the cars that are only making 200 horsepower. There's a reason you start there and then work your way up to the power, or more specifically, the high downforce cars.